Robert Redford left behind a fortune that makes his family cry. When Robert Redford passed away, Hollywood lost more than just a legendary actor and director. It lost one of its most private financial geniuses. Behind the rugged good looks and environmental activism that defined his public image, Redford had quietly built a fortune so vast and so thoughtfully structured that its revelation has left both his family and financial experts in tears, not from grief, but from awe at his extraordinary foresight. What Redford created wasn't just wealth, it was a masterclass in legacy planning, revealed a financial advisor who has worked with numerous Hollywood estates. When his family discovered the full scope of what he had built and how meticulously he had arranged it, there were literally tears. Not because of the amount, which is substantial, but because of the profound thought and care evident in every detail. Today, we're exploring the remarkable financial empire that Robert Redford constructed over 6 decades. A fortune built not through typical Hollywood channels, but through visionary investments in environmental conservation, sustainable energy, and cultural preservation that have only begun to reveal their true value since his passing. Most surprising is the revelation that Redford's most valuable assets weren't his film residuals or even his famous Sundance holdings, but a series of investments made decades ago that were deliberately structured to reach their full potential only after his lifetime, creating a legacy that transforms our understanding of a man many thought they knew through his films. But first, let's examine how Redford's approach to wealth differed fundamentally from that of his Hollywood contemporaries, and why the foundations of his fortune remained hidden from public view for so long.
On the legitimate stage, which I did in New York, you think of yourself first of all as an actor?
The early investment philosophy that changed everything. While many Hollywood stars of his generation focused on traditional status symbols and visible luxury, Redford took a radically different approach to wealth building, one rooted in his Colorado childhood and shaped by values that would seem prescient in today's world, but were considered eccentric when he began his financial journey. Robert had this fundamental belief that formed very early in his life. Real value comes from land, water, and sustainable systems, explained a business associate who worked with Redford for over 3 decades. While other stars were buying mansions in Beverly Hills and investing in fashion lines, he was quietly acquiring water rights in the American West, when few people understood their long-term significance. This unconventional focus began in the 1960s when Redford used his earliest film earnings to purchase land in Utah's Provo Canyon, the property that would eventually become Sundance. But what appeared to many as simply an actor's retreat was actually the first piece in a sophisticated investment strategy centered on natural resources. What made Redford's approach revolutionary wasn't just what he bought, but how he structured ownership, revealed a conservation finance expert familiar with his holdings. He developed a model where land could simultaneously generate sustainable income, appreciate in value, and be protected environmentally. It was a triple bottom-line approach decades before that concept had a name. This philosophy manifested in his approach to the Sundance property itself. Rather than maximizing short-term development potential, Redford created a carefully limited resort and arts center that preserved most of the 5,000 acres in its natural state. This balanced approach generated enough revenue to maintain the property while allowing its underlying land value to appreciate dramatically as surrounding areas became overdeveloped. Most celebrities approach real estate as consumption, buying luxury properties that cost money to maintain, noted a real estate investment specialist who has studied Redford's portfolio. Redford approached it as true investment, acquiring properties with inherent value that would increase over time while generating sustainable income. The difference in long-term outcomes is staggering. This foundational philosophy would guide Redford's wealth building for 6 decades, creating a fortune estimated to significantly exceed $200 million, far more than public estimates suggested during his lifetime. But even more remarkable than the amount is how that wealth was structured and directed.
As I got older and I went into acting, I was drawn to the idea of outlaw.
The water rights empire hidden in plain sight. The most valuable and least understood component of Redford's fortune was his systematic acquisition of water rights throughout the American West, a resource whose value has multiplied many times over due to climate change and population growth in arid regions. Starting in the 1970s, when most investors couldn't see beyond oil and real estate, Redford began quietly acquiring water rights throughout Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico, explained a natural resource attorney who has worked on water rights transactions. These weren't random purchases. He specifically targeted rights in watersheds he believed would face scarcity issues in the future. According to those familiar with his holdings, Redford ultimately accumulated water rights estimated to control access to over 200,000 acre-feet of water annually, enough to serve the needs of a city of approximately 400,000 people. At current market rates in the water-stressed western states, these rights are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. What makes these holdings particularly valuable isn't just their scale, but their strategic locations, noted a hydrologist who has studied Western water systems. Redford somehow identified watersheds that would become critically important decades later, acquiring senior rights that give his holdings priority during shortage periods. It's as if he had hydrological forecasting abilities no one else possessed. The brilliance of these investments became fully apparent only in recent years, as Western states have faced unprecedented drought conditions, and water resources have become increasingly contested and valuable. Rights that Redford purchased for pennies on the dollar have multiplied in value hundreds of times over. The structure of these holdings is what brings his family to tears, revealed a financial planner familiar with the estate. Rather than simply amassing these rights for financial gain, Redford placed many of them in specialized conservation trusts that allow for both environmental protection and responsible leasing. The income generated is directed toward further conservation efforts while still benefiting his heirs. This approach created a perpetual legacy machine. Assets that simultaneously protect critical watersheds, generate substantial income for both family and conservation causes, and continue to appreciate in value. It's a structure that reflects Redford's lifelong commitment to proving that environmental protection and financial success could be complementary rather than contradictory. When his grandchildren fully understood what he had built, they were overwhelmed, said a family friend. It wasn't just the value, it was the realization that he had created something that would allow them to continue his environmental work for generations while being financially secure. The emotion came from seeing how deeply he had thought about their future.
And then the personal connection I feel to it. And the second is, I'd like to talk about
the Sundance effect beyond the film festival. While most people associate Redford's business acumen with the Sundance Film Festival and Institute, these highly visible ventures represent only a small fraction of the Sundance-branded empire he constructed, an interconnected network of businesses that generates far more revenue than the public realized. The festival and institute operate as non-profits and were never designed as wealth-building vehicles, explained an entertainment industry analyst familiar with Sundance operations. The real financial genius was how Redford leveraged the Sundance brand and ethos across multiple revenue-generating businesses while maintaining absolute authenticity. The Sundance Resort, while deliberately limited in size to preserve the surrounding environment, has become one of the most profitable boutique resorts in America on a per-room basis, with reported profit margins exceeding 40%, approximately double the industry average for luxury properties. This exceptional performance stems from its unique positioning and limited supply. Redford rejected dozens of opportunities to expand the resort to a scale that would have generated far more short-term revenue, noted a hospitality consultant who worked with Sundance. This deliberate constraint created exclusivity and authenticity that allowed for premium pricing while preserving the property's character. It's literally the opposite of how most celebrity-branded resorts operate. Beyond the physical resort, Redford developed the Sundance catalog as a separate business entity that grew into a surprisingly profitable retail operation. What began as a small mail-order business selling artisanal products has evolved into a significant retail operation with annual revenue estimated at over $200 million and profit margins well above industry standards. The catalog business is the hidden financial engine that most people overlook, revealed a retail industry analyst. Unlike typical celebrity merchandise plays that peak quickly and fade, Sundance Catalog has shown remarkable longevity and consistent growth because it was built around genuine values rather than simply exploiting Redford's name. In 2019, Redford sold a significant stake in the Sundance holdings to Murdoch Capital and Brentwood Associates, a transaction that reportedly valued the combined business entities at over $500 million. The proceeds from this sale were largely directed into the expansion of his conservation investments rather than personal consumption. What moved his family wasn't learning about the sale price, which was substantial, said a person familiar with the transaction. It was discovering how Redford had structured the deal to ensure that the Sundance ethos would be legally protected even after majority control passed to new owners. Every detail reflected his determination to ensure that what he built would maintain its integrity beyond his lifetime. This combination of financial success and values preservation is exceedingly rare in celebrity businesses, which typically either compromise values for profit or maintain values at the expense of financial performance. Redford's ability to achieve both simultaneously reflects his unique business philosophy.
But they had to work together. I said, well, now that's interesting, which of course led to why were they working together.
The renewable energy investments that came decades too early. Perhaps the most forward-thinking aspect of Redford's investment strategy was his early and substantial commitment to renewable energy. Investments made decades before clean energy became a mainstream financial sector and positioned with remarkable foresight. Robert was placing significant capital into solar and wind projects in the 1980s, when most of Wall Street still viewed alternative energy as fringe hippie technology, explained a renewable energy financier who collaborated with Redford on several projects. He didn't just make token investments. He committed substantial portions of his net worth at a time when these technologies were considered financially dubious. These early investments focused particularly on solar technologies, with Redford providing both capital and land for some of America's first utility-scale solar developments in the Southwest. While many of these early projects delivered modest or even negative returns in their initial years, Redford maintained and even increased his commitments. What's extraordinary is that he structured these investments with 30 and 40-year time horizons, noted an energy investment specialist. It's as if he could see the future of energy markets decades in advance. He essentially told his financial advisors, "These won't pay off during my career, and that's intentional. They're for the next generation." This unusually long-term perspective has resulted in renewable energy holdings that have multiplied in value many times over as solar and wind have become mainstream power sources. Projects that struggled to find financing when Redford backed them are now among the most valuable energy assets in their regions. There was an emotional family meeting after his passing when his renewable portfolio was fully explained to his heirs, revealed a person familiar with the estate. His son James actually broke down when he realized that projects his father had been ridiculed for supporting in the 1980s were now worth tens of millions and positioned exactly in the growth sectors of modern energy markets. Beyond their financial value, these energy investments were structured to advance Redford's environmental goals. Many include provisions that direct a percentage of revenue toward conservation efforts or clean energy research, creating another self-perpetuating legacy that serves both family interests and broader environmental causes. The renewable portfolio isn't just valuable, it's continuing to grow at an accelerating rate, explained an energy market analyst. Redford essentially placed massive bets on the energy transition decades before it was recognized as inevitable. As fossil fuels continue to decline and renewables expand, these holdings will likely become the single largest component of his legacy in purely financial terms. This remarkable foresight in energy investing provides perhaps the clearest window into Redford's unique approach to wealth, a willingness to forgo immediate returns in favor of investments aligned with both his values and his conviction about the direction of future markets.
No, it wasn't, and I had very mixed feelings about it. I still do, to be honest with you.
The unconventional family trust structure. Beyond the specific assets in Redford's portfolio, what has generated the most emotional response from his family is the innovative trust structure he created, a system specifically designed to balance wealth preservation, environmental impact, and individual freedom for future generations. What Redford created isn't a typical Hollywood family trust focused on tax avoidance and control, explained an estate planning attorney familiar with the structure. It's a values-based legacy system that gives his descendants resources to pursue meaningful work while preventing the wealth from creating dependency or entitlement. Unlike conventional trusts that either provide heirs with minimal oversight or impose strict controls on distributions, Redford developed a unique, purpose-driven structure that offers family members substantial resources for entrepreneurial, artistic, or environmental initiatives while limiting purely consumption-focused distributions. The trust essentially says to his descendants, Here are significant resources to do important work, not to simply live off the family name, noted a wealth management expert who has studied innovative trust structures. It provides education funding without limits, startup capital for businesses with environmental or social components, and matching funds for charitable work, but is surprisingly restrictive for luxury purchases or passive income. This approach reflects Redford's own relationship with wealth, seeing it as a tool for impact rather than a means for personal luxury or status. By structuring his estate this way, he attempted to transfer not just financial assets, but the values that guided his own use of resources throughout his life. When the details of this structure were explained to his grandchildren, it led to a powerful moment of recognition, revealed a family friend present for some of these discussions. They suddenly understood that their grandfather had created a system that would allow them to pursue meaningful work with substantial support without the burden of unearned wealth that has damaged so many families of privilege. The trust includes innovative features rarely seen in celebrity estates, such as educational provisions that cover unlimited advanced degrees in environmental sciences, sustainable business, or arts disciplines. It also contains entrepreneurial funding mechanisms that provide venture capital for family-initiated projects with potential environmental or cultural benefits. What makes the structure so emotional for the family isn't the money itself. It's the profound thoughtfulness behind how it can be used, explained a person familiar with the family's reaction. Redford created a system that says, "I believe in your potential to do important work," not just, "Here's money because we're related." That vote of confidence across generations is what brought tears. This careful balance between providing opportunity and preventing entitlement represents Redford's attempt to solve a challenge that has plagued wealthy families throughout history: how to transfer resources without undermining the initiative and purpose that often come from financial necessity.
A lot of filmmakers, once they can use high tech to do special effects, they get focused on that. So there's a lot of razzle-dazzle.
Private Land Conservation Network. While Redford's environmental activism was well known during his lifetime, what remained largely hidden from public view was the extensive private conservation network he quietly assembled, a collection of strategically located properties that form wildlife corridors and watershed protection systems across the American West. Over a 40-year period, Robert systematically acquired lands that most people viewed as having limited value, but that served critical ecological functions, explained a conservation biologist who worked with Redford on several projects. He focused particularly on connector properties, parcels that linked existing protected areas to create wildlife migration corridors or complete watershed systems. This strategy reflected Redford's sophisticated understanding of conservation science long before such concepts became mainstream. Rather than simply purchasing scenic or high-profile properties, he targeted lands that provided maximum ecological benefit regardless of their public visibility or conventional market value. Redford accumulated over 30,000 acres of these strategic conservation properties beyond his well-known Sundance holdings, revealed a land trust expert familiar with his portfolio. Most were acquired through private transactions and immediately placed under conservation easements that permanently protect them from development while maintaining family ownership. What makes this land portfolio particularly valuable from both conservation and financial perspectives is its strategic positioning. Many properties are located in areas that have experienced dramatic development pressure and value appreciation in subsequent years, making their protected status increasingly significant. He had an uncanny ability to identify areas that would face development pressure decades later, noted a conservation real estate specialist. Properties he paid thousands for are now worth millions. Not that he or his family would ever develop them, but that increased value reflects the growing importance of the conservation work these lands are doing. The family's emotional response to this land network came from discovering both its scale and the sophisticated ecological strategy behind it. What had appeared to be separate conservation efforts across multiple states was revealed to be an integrated vision for landscape-level protection, implemented with remarkable patience and foresight. When his children and grandchildren were shown maps of the complete land network and how the properties work together ecologically, they were overwhelmed, said a person present for this family meeting. They suddenly understood that their father and grandfather had been quietly executing a conservation master plan across multiple decades without seeking recognition or even explaining the full scope of what he was building. This private conservation network represents a form of wealth that transcends conventional financial metrics, assets whose true value lies in their environmental function rather than their market price. Yet, paradoxically, by protecting these lands when their market value was low, Redford simultaneously created significant financial appreciation that benefits his heirs, while ensuring the properties remain environmentally protected in perpetuity.
I was drawn to the idea of outlaw characters. What's really interesting, though, that I don't know...
The documentary film rights portfolio. One of the most unexpected elements of Redford's financial legacy, and one that reportedly moved his filmmaker son James to tears, was his systematic acquisition of rights to hundreds of documentary films, creating a specialized media library whose cultural and financial value has grown exponentially in the streaming era. Beginning in the early days of the Sundance Institute, Robert began personally acquiring rights to documentary films that addressed environmental and social justice themes, explained an entertainment attorney familiar with these holdings. These weren't Sundance Institute investments. They were personal acquisitions structured as long-term preservation plays rather than immediate commercial ventures. Over 4 decades, Redford quietly assembled rights to more than 400 documentary films, many of which were groundbreaking works on environmental issues, indigenous rights, and social movements. At the time of acquisition, most had limited commercial prospects beyond festival screenings and occasional television broadcasts. He would approach documentary filmmakers who were struggling to find distribution and offer to purchase perpetual rights for modest but fair sums, revealed a film producer who witnessed several such transactions. Many filmmakers were simply grateful that someone valued their work enough to ensure it would be preserved and potentially seen by future audiences. The streaming revolution and growing audience interest in documentary content has transformed this seemingly altruistic collection into an unexpectedly valuable media asset. Rights that Redford acquired for thousands of dollars are now worth millions in today's content-hungry streaming marketplace. What's remarkable is that Redford somehow anticipated the future value of documentary content decades before Netflix and other platforms created a real market for it, noted a media valuation expert. He essentially built a specialized content library precisely in the categories that have seen the greatest appreciation in the streaming era. The emotional impact on his family came not just from the substantial value of these rights, but from discovering Redford's detailed plans for their use. His estate plan includes specific provisions directing that revenue generated from these films be shared between filmmakers or their estates, environmental causes related to the film's subjects, and his family trust. When James saw both the scale of the documentary portfolio and how his father had structured it to benefit the original creators, he was deeply moved, said a person familiar with the family's reaction. It perfectly embodied Robert's belief that cultural preservation and fair compensation for artists could coexist with sound financial stewardship. This documentary rights portfolio represents perhaps the purest expression of Redford's integrated approach to values and value, simultaneously preserving important cultural works, supporting filmmakers and causes he believed in, and creating appreciating assets that benefit his family. It's a legacy component that bridges his artistic and business identities in a way that has profound meaning for his filmmaker heirs.
We've used the festival to promote documentaries, starting in the late 80s and then all the way through.
The art collection nobody knew about. While many Hollywood figures assemble high-profile art collections focused on prestige names and gallery openings, Redford built a remarkably valuable collection that remained almost entirely unknown to the public, focused primarily on American Western and Native American artists whose work aligned with his environmental and cultural values. Robert wasn't collecting art as status symbols or even primarily as investments, explained an art advisor who occasionally worked with Redford. He was preserving cultural artifacts and supporting artists whose work documented landscapes, wildlife, and indigenous cultures that were at risk of being lost to development and cultural homogenization. Beginning in the 1970s, Redford systematically acquired works by both historical and contemporary Western artists, with particular focus on pieces depicting landscapes that had since been altered by development. He also built one of the world's most significant private collections of contemporary Native American art, supporting indigenous artists decades before mainstream galleries and museums recognized their importance. What makes the collection extraordinary is both its quality and its thematic coherence, noted an art historian who has studied major Western art collections. Redford wasn't buying random important names. He was constructing a visual narrative about the American West, environmental change, and indigenous perspectives through carefully selected works that relate to each other. This disciplined approach, combined with Redford's excellent eye and willingness to support artists before they achieved commercial success, resulted in a collection now valued at over $90 million according to recent appraisals. Many works have appreciated more than 2,000% since their acquisition. The family had some awareness of his art collecting, but few understood its scale or value until after his passing, revealed a person familiar with the estate. When they toured the complete collection, which includes hundreds of pieces stored in custom climate-controlled facilities, they were stunned by both its extent and how precisely it embodied his environmental and cultural values. Perhaps most moving for his heirs was discovering Redford's detailed cataloging system, which includes the story behind each acquisition and its relationship to specific environmental regions or cultural traditions. These notes reveal how his collecting was part of a larger project of cultural preservation rather than simply aesthetic appreciation or investment. His daughter-in-law was particularly emotional when she read his notes on works by female Native American artists he had supported in the 1980s, said a family friend. He had documented not just their artistic significance, but their importance as cultural preservation work at a time when these traditions were at risk of being lost. It was collecting with purpose. The collection is structured within his estate to allow for both family stewardship and significant public access through strategic museum partnerships, reflecting Redford's belief that important cultural works should be preserved for future generations regardless of who legally owns them.
And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, wait a minute, maybe for this generation, you.
The legacy that made his family cry. The full revelation of Redford's financial legacy, its scale, structure, and profound integration of values with value creation, came to his family through a series of meetings in the months following his passing. These sessions unveiled not just the extent of his wealth, but the extraordinary thoughtfulness behind how it was structured for future impact. There was a pivotal family gathering where the complete picture was finally presented, revealed a trusted advisor who participated in these discussions. It wasn't just the substantial value of the estate, which far exceeded public estimates. It was the realization that Robert had created something far more meaningful than mere wealth. He had built a legacy machine designed to advance his values across generations while providing for his family's security. What reportedly moved his family to tears wasn't discovering they had inherited significant wealth. This was expected given Redford's success, but understanding the profound intentionality behind every aspect of his estate planning. Nothing was accidental or conventional. Every component reflected his integrated vision for family support, environmental protection, and cultural preservation. The emotional moment came when they fully grasped that their father and grandfather had spent decades creating not just financial security, but purpose, a framework that would allow future generations to do meaningful work rather than simply inherit passive wealth, explained a person who witnessed these family discussions. This purpose-driven approach is reflected in specific trust provisions that fund environmental education for all descendants, provide startup capital for family-initiated conservation businesses, support documentary filmmaking by future generations, and maintain the land conservation network in perpetuity, all while ensuring basic financial security regardless of individual career paths. Robert essentially created a family foundation without the rigidity of a traditional foundation structure, noted a philanthropy expert familiar with the estate. He built a system that encourages entrepreneurship, creativity, and conservation work while providing guardrails that protect both the assets and the family from the negative impacts often associated with inherited wealth. The emotional impact on his family stemmed from recognizing that Redford had thought deeply about who they were as individuals and what would help them thrive, not just financially, but as purposeful human beings. His estate plan reflected intimate knowledge of their values, interests, and capabilities, customized to support each person's best potential. His granddaughter was particularly moved when she learned he had created specific provisions to support her interest in environmental education that she had only begun pursuing in recent years, revealed a family friend. It showed that even in his final planning, he was paying attention to who each family member was becoming and what would help them make their greatest contribution. This depth of thought, extending decades into the future and addressing not just financial needs, but purpose and meaning, is what ultimately brought his family to tears. The realization that Redford's final act had been to create a legacy that would allow them to extend his most deeply held values while finding their own authentic paths.